Ann.
You want me to talk about, okay, so here's the thing. Now we all know I'm not a statistics person. But I did have a blog post that caused a lot of people a lot of anxiety, which is why you guys, I think, wanted to talk to me today. My most recent blog post at lawschoolexpert.com is about the competitiveness of this admission cycle. And while I know my dear friend Nathan does not like my hyperbole at times, there's a reason this time for me to say that it's probably going to be the most competitive admission cycle ever. And the reason is,
along with the most competitive election. No, I'm sorry, most important election ever.
Well,
right? Every time.
Oh man. So no pressure on 2020 at all. But so here's the thing. You know how I've been saying I've been really feeling like I've never seen so many 174s in my life as I've seen this year? I am not insane, okay? The numbers from LSAC on the report, which there's a link to in the blog post, clearly states that in addition to all of the data that it has about the number of applicants in different regions at different schools in the month of September this year versus previous September, in the number of people with 170s to 174s, percent change current year over last year, 75%, 175 to 180, current change, 146.2% over last year. I am not crazy. More people are taking the LSAT and more people are doing better on the LSAT. So what does that mean for people? So there's a couple things going on here. One is that question, do I even apply to law school this year or don't I apply to law school? Do I wait? Okay. That's one thing I'd like to talk to people a little bit about. And then the other is the why. Why is this happening? It helps people to understand because the thing is, this will influence where people should be applying to law school. And how sure they should be of getting into certain schools if they're simply relying on previous year's data, okay? Because if there are more applicants, so if 174s and 3.8s than ever before, then Harvard's numbers won't stay at those numbers, they will go up, right? And that's true of every law school down the pipeline. Does that make sense? Am I explaining that? All right, so I'm glad we can see each other now. I can see you nodding and it's not all in my head through the ears.
Just like silence,
yeah, like guys, are you with me? Okay, so here's the thing, to break it down a little bit. This year is like this because we all know people had a lot of notice that life was gonna be kind of crazy this year. This all happened in March, which gave people, especially people who were finishing college, a lot of time to think about and prepare for the law school application process, as opposed to, I think I mentioned to your students the other night on LSAT Demon on the Zoom I did, is that in 2008, the recession happened in October. So it was a little late to see the increase that cycle. You really saw it in the 2009 cycle. This time, economic recession, jobs are disappearing, opportunities are disappearing, even internships are disappearing. You know, everything was going away for this class. That gate, and even for people already in the workforce, losing their jobs or seeing the future isn't looking so bright. They had plenty of time to gear up for this admission cycle. So that's one reason for the increase. The other reason is, people are taking the LSAT Flex more times. The LSAT Flex does seem to be inflating scores for most people. Most people who took the regular LSAT, this is totally anecdotal, you guys might have actual data, but in what I've seen, most people who took the regular LSAT and then take the Flex, they're doing much better on the Flex. Now, obviously some of that could be increased prep or what have you, but it's a lot better to sit for 3 hours than for 5. Okay, we all know this. And even with the technical difficulties people are facing, they did that on the real LSAT too. So it's not like there weren't snafus there. So I think that there's a lot of reasons people can continue taking the LSAT now. We're back to the not being penalized for additional takes. So all of these things factor into the inflation in the scores and in the number of applicants. In addition, accommodations, absolutely. And then the other piece is, of course, there will be fewer seats this year because so many people who were admitted for this past year did decide to defer. We don't have concrete numbers on that. And also law schools have been very financially impacted. Universities have been very financially impacted by COVID. And we don't know how that's going to influence scholarship awards. So what all this is saying is that it's not going to be as easy. Just because your numbers fit with where Columbia took last year or Georgetown took last year doesn't necessarily mean that's going to work this year. Because when there are more people with your numbers, and more people with numbers higher, it's all going to slide. So if you are not sure you want to go to law school this year, I do think it's a good year to sit out, especially if you were planning to defer anyway. But what I'm advising people is, if they really do want to go this year, try and see what happens. What's the worst that happens? You wait, you regroup, you reapply. Not the end of the world. But I do think that this means people have to cast a wider net with their schools list than they might have previously. I just threw a lot at really fast. So
yeah, I mean,
great.
People
let's
shouldn't
actually
get,
start with.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, people shouldn't get totally devastated, like
Mm-hmm.
they cannot possibly go to law school this cycle.
Correct.
I mean, I already have heard from several students who have been admitted this cycle and have scholarships already lined up for this cycle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not that the people aren't going to get into law school and aren't going to get scholarships to law school, but we are going to see, and another thing I'm saying that, I'm really scared for people taking the January LSAT for this cycle. I really think that because we've seen those numbers really inflated September this year over September last year for number of applicants, and all but, like, I think the thing said all but 9 schools out of the 170 law schools, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, saw huge increases. Only 9 didn't see increases in number of applications in September. And I'm guessing, I don't know, one of them, I don't know. I mean, they're probably not the schools that our listeners are applying to. So my point is, I think January is too late for this cycle. And if you're banking on the January LSAT or the February LSAT, just wait and apply early next cycle rather than late in this one. Because if rolling admissions is a thing in normal times, I think it's going to be even more imperative this cycle. And actually, I don't think I'll take on any clients who tell me they're trying to apply this cycle with a January LSAT. My existing clients who decide to do it, okay, I'll counsel them appropriately. But anyone who's going on that plan, I don't think that I'll step on board with that, because I don't feel super confident people are going to outperform their numbers or even perform at their numbers applying that late this cycle.
Agreed. Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about specifically, I mean, it's not as big picture, but you mentioned the number of schools you thought that people should apply more broadly.
Yes.
And I think we've been agreeing with that advice for a while, but you're saying even more broadly than maybe what they would have thought before. I'm curious, let's get some numbers on that. How many schools do you expect people to apply to, and what's the kind of range?
It's so interesting. So here's how I would always answer the question, Ben. I would always answer that by saying it depends on your goals. Some people are very tied into a certain region. You have people in DC who will not leave DC, right? So they're always going to apply to just 2 or 3 schools, depending on where they fall with the numbers. But then you have people who are looking for the best scholarship, and so they're going to apply more broadly. You have people who have 2-pronged approach. I want to see if I can get into a T14 or see what scholarships I get to a top 30. And so they're going to apply to more schools. If they're more geographically inclined, they're going to apply to more. If someone's a splitter, they're going to apply to more than someone who's not, so I think there's a lot of different variables that go into how I advise an individual client on how many schools to apply to, given their goals and credentials, and preferences, to be honest, geographic and et cetera. So I think what I would say is that here's a way I would phrase it. If you would normally look at the medians and call the medians for a school for last year kind of a target school, I would argue that it might this year be a tiny bit of a reach. And if last year's numbers were a big reach, it's going to be nearly impossible this year, right? If last year's numbers were, you were between the 25th and 75th percentiles on both numbers, then I would say that's probably your target school this year, rather than the school where you're at the medians. Does that make sense? I would just assume that the numbers this year are going to be a little higher. And so I would stretch out my schools list that way. So it might not even be increasing the number of schools you apply to, but rather which schools they are.
So one thing I want to dig into a little bit is you mentioned this example of like, hey, some people are stuck in DC, so they're going to apply to 2 or 3 schools, right? I guess when someone comes to me and says, hey, look, I want to stay in DC, so it doesn't make sense to apply to these other schools. The thought that's always in the back of my head is that they're holding on to some assumption that they really need to stay in DC. Like if they applied more broadly and were accepted elsewhere, I would not be surprised at all to see people say, well, okay, I hadn't thought about leaving, but I got a
You're
full
going to
ride
leave your wife
here.
and 4 kids and go over to California for law school, Ben?
Everything is negotiable.
I've learned that in 2020, trust me. I'm just happy Nathan hasn't seen me on Tinder. We're good. So here's the thing.
Wait, what?
It's funny. Okay, so here's the thing. For most people who tell me they have to stay in a certain area, I assume I know these people well enough to know there's actually a reason. So in DC, it's often that people want to keep their jobs and go to law school part-time, or they have a significant other that's employed in DC. Sometimes, yes, you can, if that's not the case, usually that's what it is. The only people who are really hesitant to leave where they live are New Yorkers. They do not want to leave New York, man. They love New York. So I would just say, I always bring up options to people, Ben, and say, have you thought about applying to Fordham? Have you thought about applying to schools in Philadelphia? It's not really that big a deal to commute. But in the end, it's that person's life and decision, and it's up to them. Sometimes people will say to me, well, what if I apply to more just for scholarship negotiation? And I haven't seen that be super effective recently because I haven't seen it. I think schools are just onto the scholarship negotiation thing. I'm not saying they don't move at all, but I don't encourage people to apply to law schools for that purpose.
Can I just push back a little bit on that?
Please, yeah.
Not necessarily for negotiating purposes, but so that the student will know their worth at other schools. To put them in a better negotiating position, just because they'll oh, well, I see what I could get over here and I see what I could get over here. Yeah. And now if I really am not leaving New York City, at least I can compare those offers outside the city to the offers inside the city and get a temperature.
I always think it's good to have more options. I counsel all my clients, let's cast a wider net at the beginning to give you more options later so that you have an actual choice to make. I'm a big believer in that. Yeah.
Because they might be surprised, right? If Philadelphia, some school outside the city makes some crazy offer, then, oh shit, maybe it is worth going.
Absolutely. The thing I'm often telling people is, I really caution people before they apply binding somewhere for this exact reason. Right. I often find, especially in this day and age, most people are not ready to make a permanent decision for their lives 10 months in advance. And I often see people regret those decisions. So when they do apply binding and panic over them. So I'm not the biggest fan of that. That's not for everyone. And in fact, it's for very few people. So I think this is similar, right? I want people to have options. And if people say to me, I only want to go to law school if X, Y, and Z, it's usually to me someone who doesn't necessarily want to go to law school. If they're so narrow in where they would go, it's usually, it depends on the circumstances, but I think that comes into play with that too, Nathan.
Yeah.
Not to harp on this too much, but I want to piggyback on what you were saying, Nathan. If someone does get those offers elsewhere that are great, right? I still feel like that's when things start to change in people's minds. They're set, but then they're like, wait a sec. Yeah. Is it really worth it to pay half where I could go for free here?
This is exactly what I tell everyone, Ben. I want my client at the beginning, when I have initial consult, I'll often use this line with people. I will say, my goal for you is 9-10 months from now to be agonizing over a choice between getting into a law school you're so psyched to get into, you didn't think you could get into, versus a scholarship to a really good law school. I want you agonizing over that choice. Even if you say that, because what I see every time, how long have I been doing the 17 cycles, people come in at the beginning caring about ranking, and at the end, they're about to sign their name on the dotted line, realize they're not getting as much support from family as they thought. They're about to take out a shitload of loans and they freak out, right? So I always want in the beginning for people to have that option, so they're struggling with it 9-10 months later. Struggle, I don't care which way they choose, right? The high ranked school, the scholarship to a good law school. What I care about is that they don't have regrets later, and if they go through the struggle, they're less likely to regret. They'll have thought it through, they'll have had the option rather than pigeonholing themselves into one decision.
Well, and it is such a big decision, right? This is a huge pivot point in your life, and you're categorically ruling out options if you limit yourself at the very beginning. Whereas
I think it's hard for people
to struggle through that.
Yeah. I think at the point where people are listening to us now and they're in LSAT mode, Ben, I think that they're so fixated on the getting in, they're not so much fixated on the outcome yet. They're so nervous and anxious about getting in. Where will I get in? What options will I have? That they're not really thinking about that. They're in a very different place when it's time to make the decision. And that's exactly why I'm agreeing with you that to cast a wider net, whether it's geographically, rankings wise, what have you.
You change your whole perspective on the whole game you're playing. Law schools have done a great job of creating this artificial scarcity where they make it look like it's such a privilege to get into any law school. The truth is, when we have people apply to 15 schools or 20 schools, they end up getting 15 offers or 12 offers or multiple competing scholarship offers. And it just flips the game entirely on its head, where you realize, oh, no, the schools want me. They want my scores. They want me to come to their school. They need bodies. They need people who are overqualified to go to their school. That's why they offered me this scholarship. Or if I'm right in the middle of the numbers at the school, hell yes, you're going to get into that school. They have a business to run. Like, that's what they do, is they admit people who look exactly like you. And if you only apply to one school, you just, you're sitting there waiting desperately to just barely be admitted. But if you apply to 10 schools, they're fighting for you.
I remind people all the time, Nathan, they're the consumer here. They are making the choice. Yeah, there's a gateway, but they're making the choice.
Yeah, they're the boss of the whole situation.
They're the buyers. Yeah.
The reason why we say don't pay for law school on every single show is that you don't have to pay for law school if you don't want to. There are plenty of schools out there that you can go to for free. And start with that assumption that you're going to go for free. And then if some other better, if Harvard admits you and not, if that's like a total dream for you, then okay, maybe it's worth paying. But basically everybody who should go to law school can go to law school for free.
Ann, do you have anything else you want to tell our listeners?
Anything else I want to say?
Yeah.
Just so the listeners know, Ann was with us on Demon Live it was for all Demon subscribers. That video is now posted to the Demon. So anybody who subscribes to LSAT Demon can watch Ann's video.
And we should say that Ann Levine is the law school expert. I don't know if I gave you a proper introduction.
Oh, that's all right. I just assume, by now.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm so famous. No, Ann Levine, Law School Expert, is the site and the blog. And the 4th edition of the Law School Admission Game came out in June. So it's fully up to date with LSAT Flex and COVID and everything. So that is definitely the one to pick up. And if I can be of help, I'm always happy to answer questions on the blog. There's a contact form on my site where I answer questions through. Just ask people to be patient because it's October. And, that's kind of like, I always say October is like, if I were an accountant, it's like my April 15th.
Yeah.
Yeah, but everything's good. I think you guys are doing awesome work. I hear so much good stuff. Everyone's loving Demon. And sorry, I couldn't find my Demon t-shirt. I tried to be in the spirit and couldn't find. I'm literally looking at suitcases all over the floor. I don't know where it is. So if I can be of help, let me know.
Thanks, Ann. Yeah.